Support your local charities and win great prizes by playing bingo on Rogers TV.
You're watching Rogers TV. The following program was provided by a valued member of our local community. Rogers TV is proud to support local producers and share local voices, ideas, and opinions. For more information, please visit our website. The opinions expressed in the following programs are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of Rogers Cable or Rogers TV.
Hello, NBpoli Pod world. Welcome back to another week. We're back. We had some technical difficulties last week. We apologize. We were just not able to figure out some of the StreamYard issues, and we were just not able to get the scheduled lineup after we did. So we missed last week. Apologies for that. And this week we're heading into a pretty interesting next few days because we're going to be in Ottawa.
Yeah, this one's going to be more of a ramble on, Rose.
We got to catch up on New Brunswick, though.
Yeah, we do. And we're going to be in Ottawa next week at the Federation of Canadian Municipalities Conference.
Yes.
And the last time we were there was 2 years ago now in Toronto.
Yep.
And there was an episode we did there. You kind of get it's almost like summer camp for city councilors and mayors and stuff like that, because you're with everybody else who does this across the country. And you really feel a sense of camaraderie, and you learn a lot from folks who are also doing similar work.
Yes, and we've been diving in heavy on the federal issues, of course, during the election. Now we're going to dive in next week into the municipal realities and in more on that. But today we got to catch up on some provincial matters. So we're in Mennequist, as always. We're in St. John. It's myself, Brent, and Joanna today. And Beatrix may join us. We're not sure. Some of you like to hear the gurgly frustrations of Beatrix getting mad at us because we're sitting in the same spot for too long and not entertaining her. But either way, we might get her down here in a few. She's just taking a nap, which is great for us.
Yes.
I didn't finish the land acknowledgement. Apologies. We're in Mennequist on the unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq, the Maliseet, and the Pescatomakati. And we have a lot to catch up.
Yes, there's so much going on in New Brunswick right now, from, food banks losing funding, librarians losing positions. And I don't want to say that's all just loss that is going on. There is, some work happening. I know there's a new collaborative care clinic opening.
Yep. Our family doctor just got a collaborative care clinic, Dr. Sampson here.
And we directly asked her, we're like, is this, because of the recent changes in government? And she did say that they've made it a lot easier to start collaborative care clinics, which I thought was super interesting.
It's always the funding piece, right? It's
how they pay doctors. Yeah.
How do they pay the nurses? So like an interesting point for healthcare. And I guess a point on the board for Dr. Dornan and his minister.
Yes.
We've given him some points in the past because he is putting in the work. He's not trying to hog the mic.
No.
He's not trying to do fancy videos.
No.
But he is showing up. He is talking to us.
Yeah.
We're here and in his part of riding, obviously, we're his council. So he's talking to us, and our other councilors like talking to him as well.
Yeah, and he's got a bee situation going on top of the legislature. Did you see that?
He's got what?
He is a beekeeper and has been a beekeeper for 25 years. And whoever, maintenance or whoever on high at the legislature has allowed Dr. Dornan to put 2 hives on top of the ledge. So there was a whole.
Awesome.
Yeah, you didn't know that.
I didn't know that. I've been so obsessed with federal politics.
Yeah, so you didn't get to hear a little good news story. It was very sweet. So they had a whole photo up there in his full bee suit.
Oh my God, that's a hippie thirst trap right there for we got to get.
And he's helping to fix healthcare. Oh my God, dreamboat.
Gosh, dream man. Okay, Dr. Dornan. Dr. Dornan. Anyway, that's awesome. I didn't know that, but I guess we did need somebody to fulfill some sort of agrarian role now that we've lost Kevin Arsenault.
And listen, there's not a lot of good news coming from that side of things. One of the biggest pieces of this announcement of the $1 million loss to Food Ailment, I believe they're called, out of Moncton, is that the contracts that farmers had with them are now not being honored. So there was a farmer on Facebook recently directly calling this out in that, you plan pretty far ahead when it comes to your crops, right? And so it's really unfortunate that they're shorting them. But immediately I thought was, okay, well, how do we get that food into stores and into the local market, I guess.
And I'm just trying to find a post that Fred LaForge sent us a while back, just kind of commenting on the Liberal government's transition around their agricultural policy.
Well, I think he had the numbers up there. One recently about $4 million for the seafood industry and 173,000.
Right, agriculture. Yes, that's what it was. That's exactly where is she awake?
No plug.
Oh, plug. Sorry, everybody. We're just gonna plug in the monitor. I'm just looking up some stats here. But yeah, Fred LaForge has been on here many times before, and he's talked about sort of the agricultural sector of things, the farmers market, and how we make products and how people can get started, and how difficult it is in New Brunswick. And there's no question, it's very difficult to start farms. I mean, it's one of these things that I remember getting interested in agriculture probably about 9 years ago. Regenerative agriculture, permaculture.
Yes.
I was really starting to pay attention to it.
We have a neighbor who's really working on it.
Yes.
And so it's kind of sparking the conversation.
Our neighbor Emily, who works at Cedar Crest, is up there doing some pretty cool stuff in her backyard, and we're trying to just keep pace with ours. I was out pulling Japanese knotweed yesterday. So, but yeah, the reality with New Brunswick is it's interesting. Our agricultural, we're only sovereign, if you call food sovereignty a piece. New Brunswick's only food sovereign in 4 staples: salmon, blueberries, maple syrup, and potatoes. So that makes
a pretty decent diet.
That's not a bad meal, right? Like if we all had to live off potatoes, salmon, and blueberries and maple syrup, we could probably cobble together a few different meals, a couple of breakfasts.
Well, we'd still be growing the greens and the easy stuff, right?
Once in a while, we'd have a few raspberries.
We'd have to have our own backyard. It's what they call war gardens.
Yeah, victory gardens.
Victory gardens.
So anyway, but we used to farm about 14-15% of our agrable land, which is the land that's sort of easily accessible for agriculture. We're now down to like 5%.
Yeah.
So a lot of vacant land out there, and this is always a tough one, right? So, we're going through this right now. We have a lot of people who in the municipal side of things who are frustrated with the idea of expanding industrial parks and taking over forest land and forested areas. Well, agriculture is the same deal, right? Anytime you want to put a field in to grow things, you do have to displace a lot of nature to do that. And New Brunswick did that for a long time. We displaced a lot more land for agriculture back in the early 1900s, but we ate what we made, and we ate what we made locally. We
certainly couldn't rely on imports.
No, we couldn't.
That time.
And so that culture shift, neoliberalism, is sort of the culprit there, right? It moved all the attention off of New Brunswick's ability to grow what it eats and export a little bit to its neighbors, into a free-for-all where you can bring in tangerines from Morocco if you want any time of the year. And that is the world we live in, but it's not the world we're going to have. And so from a systems perspective, the agricultural one that I think Fred pointed out is a real missed opportunity for the government. If you're going to put $4 million into aquaculture, and I get it.
Yes.
Salmon's a big sector. And I will say this, I've been paying attention a lot to the federal issues.
Yes.
And I heard, I forget who it was. I think it was Scott Reed. It was either Scott Reed or it was Andrew McDougall. Either one of it was a Hurley Burley podcast. It was either Hurley's interview or it was them just talking about issues. And they brought up the point, like these interprovincial trade barriers that they're trying to bring down.
Yeah.
It comes with a cost because there's a lot of industries that are protected. So you're going to have to say to the aquaculture industry in Nova Scotia, sorry, you have to now compete openly with the aquaculture industry in New Brunswick, which is 10 times more mature. Like first of all, Cook Aquaculture is the country's largest aquaculture. It's the world's largest, planet-wide. It is the world's largest privately owned aquaculture company.
Because they've acquired a significant amount of South American fish plants, European, Southeast Asia, I believe.
Yep, down through the eastern seaboard of the States,
yeah,
all through Nova Scotia.
Which is a lesson to anyone who really wants to know what, you know, neoliberalism is and what capitalism looks like in our day and age. It is that. It is centralizing something that used to be, instead of like 50 fish plants, is now one.
Which creates
one
fragility.
Company. Yeah.
Because it's like a house of cards, right? If you have a disruption in that company, let's say there's a scandal, let's say there's an accident, let's say there's a supply chain disruption. Well, you don't have the resiliency of having multiple actors.
Yeah.
I think often in natural systems, in the forest, right? Not everything hinges on the oak tree. Not everything hinges on the small ferns. Like they all sort of work. And if one has a disease or a pest or is eaten up a lot by, you know, deer who happen to be roaming through, there's all kinds of resiliency factors to continue that biodiversity in the soil locally. Yeah. Well, when you have one company that runs it all, you don't have that, right? No. You really are exposed. We've seen this with beef. Yeah. Where 90% or so of the beef production in this country is Alberta based. And during COVID, when those factories had to really hem in scale back what they could do for personnel on the factory floor, we felt it. We saw the price soar. Yeah. And so I look at this and it's like, we're putting $4 million into an industry that's already healthy. Yes, very healthy. As a subsidy. And we're saying to the agriculture industry, here's our pennies. Yeah, here's $173,000. Yeah. It breaks my heart, even for like the blueberry farmer or the potato farmer, like which we all know those are fairly big families as well. They are here. But you know, there's just so much happening around the world when it comes to like different ways of farming and farming in inhospitable conditions. Like there is no real reason why we can't look at some of these other options. But no, and it would have been nice if we saw a little more. I'd say, you know, it's a missed point for reading the room for the government, right? Not like an NBIF is never going to invest in a modular food processing facility. Like, you know, there's no, or ONB or any of those places, because they're looking for these. No, as a matter of fact, we know somebody who tried this process. Yeah, I tried to work through that system. And when you're working on something that's not like either highly technical, and I'd say this is highly technical, but it is just purchasing things that already exist and putting them somewhere and growing that business in New Brunswick. But that's not necessarily something that you're going to go and export out of New Brunswick. So then you're not going to get the attention of these local investment firms. Yeah. In that same way. It's true. You're not big enough. Well, not necessarily, but again, what's your goal? Yes, exactly. Is the goal to survive a disruption to your supply chains, right? George Monbiot famously pointed this out in his TED Talk. If you haven't listened to George Monbiot's TED Talk, you should go listen to it. Very good. But he says, the world during the pandemic saw two massive choke points, the Turkish Straits and the Panama Canal. Yep. When the tanker got stuck sideways in the Panama Canal, it really messed up our supply chains, right? There was a lot of empty shelves. A lot of stuff didn't get to go. And that's not just because everything comes from China through the Panama. It's that ship was supposed to have dropped off its load a week ago and pick up this load from Florida to bring to New Brunswick, but they couldn't because they were on the other side of the Panama Canal. Some of them had to long haul down around the Argentinian coast, right? So if you're reading the room and you're saying, okay, people are blowing up trade agreements internationally. We have a government, we have a federal government that has now made it a goal to have free trade at the federal level between provinces by Canada Day. I think it's a noble goal, but it does mean there's going to be winners and losers. And back to my conversation about Scott Reed or Andrew McDougall, whoever it is that pointed it out, is a really astute point, actually. How are you going to convince other provinces which haven't been investing in their aquaculture industry or their similar players that, you're now openly exposed and you have to compete with the products coming out of New Brunswick because fair trade means we don't unfairly subsidize. So how is New Brunswick going to do that? Are we going to give up on those subsidies to equal the playing field? Because we've already seen what happens with our softwood lumber when we're in trade court with the United States because we give our crown land away for nothing. Yeah. And that isn't the case in the U.S. So they've taken us to court and said that's an unfair practice. It violates NAFTA. Yeah. And it does. But according to our government, it doesn't. and they're fighting about it in court for years. It's millions of dollars. And so that's kind of what we're looking at from this interprovincial trade barrier piece. Who is going to be, which province is going to be willing to say, hey, we were trying to grow a tech industry, but I guess we'll shut our mouths now and let Ontario be the tech guys because we can't match their scale. We've already, like Waterloo Corridor, Kitchener Corridor, they have already got that on lockdown.
Yes.
How are we going to see this pan out is the question. And back to the agriculture piece and that comment, like everybody knows that New Brunswick is going to have some of these interesting advantages because we have protected lumber, we have protected aquaculture, and those are two big stumbling blocks for BC, for Nova Scotia, for PEI, for Newfoundland, who don't want to lower their interprovincial trade barriers that they've put up to protect their own versions of those industries.
I know. It's going to be, the more you talk about it, the more I realize they're undoing like just decades of a monolithic system that was created in pieces, right? Like it was not created overnight. It was created over many years because there'd be something pop up like, oh my God, the Nova Scotia fishermen are, getting all the fish. We need to like this, like there's been all these issues over the years where we've been pitted against each other, even in the alcohol front, like with the booze going from like BC to New Brunswick or the opposite. You'd think, well, BC and Ontario have the wineries, they have the good stuff, but then that makes it impossible for our wineries to compete. So New Brunswick gets its back up about importing BC and Ontario wines. I know, but like we're trying to protect Magnetic Hill and the others to like be able to grow. So you can see why, especially us as the little guys, when you start getting in some of that, I mean, I just had a really good bottle of that BC wine and I can't forget about it. So it's like, if we start allowing this good stuff to get here, then we stop buying.
It's going to displace us.
Our local stuff. So I think they are going at this in a meaningful way and with good intentions, but I wonder if it's going to be a complete disaster in some ways.
I don't think it'll be a complete disaster, but but what you have is now a situation where there's winners and losers.
Yes.
And who wants to step up to be a loser? Like right now, Cook Aquaculture has this massive $4 million subsidy because the province has said, this is a strategic industry for us. We want to make sure it thrives. And we want to take advantage of all the strategic advantages we have. Interprovincial trade barriers are the only way that gets maintained. Otherwise, the other provinces say that's a violation of our interprovincial trade.
You're giving your seafood people an unfair advantage.
So that's not going to hold water by Canada Day. They can put it in the budget. They can spend that money before then because we don't have this. But the new agreements are going to have stuff like that in it. And that means that there's going to be industries. And I, for one, think it's a good thing. I think the best maker, creator, grower, manufacturer, producer of anything should be what we as a country rally behind. Like Mark Carney's vision around one Canadian economy is the hope. But the question you have to ask yourself, and the question we have to, I guess, have an answer to, or hopefully the provincial government has an answer to, where are we going to lose?
I know, because really, we will be eaten by the bigger guys, right? And like that, and this is the lesson in Canada's centralization again. When you have like a Coors or whoever, like I'm going to use alcohol because it's easier. Like you have a big producer, Molson out of Ontario, who has a plant in Moncton, for instance, and like tries to invest in all these places. When you're a Moosehead, like you're going to have a real tough time competing countrywide against these guys. And so, is the New Brunswick government going to be permitted or, allowed to subsidize some of the activities of the smaller, even like a Pickeroons, for instance, to help them sell to these other places?
Well, it's going to flood right now. If I go to Nova Scotia or PEI, I can't find a can of Pickeroons easily. Sometimes it's in some stores. Like, remember we were in Newfoundland? And there was all these different craft beers. And we're like, oh, I've never heard of them. But that's the reason why. Because our province does not allow a certain amount of those other products in without tariffs. So tariffs are the big word of the year, tariffs.
Because and you'll see they're more expensive when there's some of them are here.
Yes, that's right. And that's because the province says, no, we want to protect pickeroons, we want to protect gridiron, we want to protect moosehead. And it's like that is how rich countries got rich, by the way. That book I've quoted before, Eric S. Reiner, How Rich Countries Got Rich, Why Poor Countries Stay Poor. Because the rich countries put tariffs on their industries, released them into markets that weren't ready for them, so they took over it all. And then they made rules for the World Trade Organization that you can't do what we did to get there. You're not allowed, if you have a knife factory, you're not allowed to subsidize it with tax dollars in the Congo to get the scale that you need and then release it onto the market like we did. It's a really bad colonial legacy.
It is.
But we're barreling back toward this internationally with the U.S., but we're trying to get out of it interprovincially.
Interprovincially, yeah.
And nobody's really I haven't even heard somebody talk about it this long. Like, we're up to 19 minutes now, almost all we've been talking about interprovincial trade.
I know.
And what the complexity of it is and what's at stake. The advantage to it is you do have one economy. You can row in the same direction.
It sounds amazing on paper. But you're going to have winners and losers, like you say. And provinces like New Brunswick, I think, are at the biggest risk. Yeah,
because we have 4 companies that run this entire province, in many ways, like economically. Irving, McCain.
I got to go get this little munchkin here.
We'll pause here 1 second. Beatrix is back with us. If you're on Rogers TV, you can see her in the background, just chomping away on a banana. Good old nanner. Anyway, interprovincial trade barriers suck. Like, again, Cook Aquaculture is going to take over the entire aquaculture seafood industry in Canada.
Yeah. You heard it here first.
You heard it here first. Why? Because we subsidized them.
Yeah.
And the federal government's even subsidized them in some cases. Now they have all this scalability and expertise around the globe to bring to bear on a Canadian economy. And I know that the aquaculture industry in BC is mature enough to probably withstand some of it, but you have to understand that's what BC's concern is.
Yeah.
Like, when they were talking about lowering all these interprovincial trade barriers. But what I've heard slip into vernacular is free trade within Canada as far as the federal government is concerned. So that
interesting statement.
So that means there's going to be an allowance for provinces to still have control over their domain to some extent, but fisheries is a federally regulated industry. So I don't know. I don't.
Well, just natural resources in general. We have so much here that apparently the world wants, and we're going to start talking about critical minerals and things like that. So there's going to be some provinces that are extreme winners in some of this. So we better stop hearing about everyone complain about equalization payments, because this is naturally going to be a thing. Yeah. There's no way all of us can be all equal to each other, as much as Alberta really wants to believe that. Like, it's not possible. This is all about equity. It's not about equality. And I think that's where a lot of provinces get.
Well, yeah. I mean, look at New Brunswick. You have an economic engine like St. John and Moncton, and you have Fredericton, which really doesn't make or grow or produce or move anything.
I mean, they'd say they were like the tech capital of the province.
Yeah, but Radiant 6 didn't start in Fredericton.
Ooh.
You heard it here first. But yeah, like, it is like our province is a little microcosm of that, right? Yeah. Where the economy in Miramichi is struggling, and it's never going to be. It doesn't have some of those advantages that St. John does or Moncton does, and so how do we treat it? Well, we sometimes we try to push different industries there. We get the federal government to go put a Service Canada Center there. Yeah. What is it that they do out of Miramichi? Is it CRA?
CRA.
Yeah, it is CRA stuff, I think. Yeah. So, that brought in 500, 600 jobs.
Yeah, right.
So, but you have to understand that there's just going to be industries that are bought up, and people are going to be fired.
Yeah.
And those companies are going to be shut down because they were competition to the mothership.
Yeah. Wherever the mothership is, depending on the industry.
And I think that's better in the long term, but it's going to be in short-term pain. And like you say, the need for us to understand that, I guess we need to reskill these workers.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anyway, that's trade.
And on to the education piece. I actually just called up an article from 21 hours ago, where now Claire Johnson, the Minister of Education, is walking back some of these decisions and saying, maybe we need to reverse them, or maybe we need to look at other ways to make sure we can keep these support positions in place. So it looks like the Liberals are already responding to the criticism they got for 60 some support jobs in Anglophone West alone. But yeah, it speaks to sort of this centralization thing. Again, I was just talking with my sister about, for instance, the west side of St. John, home to about 30 to 40,000 people, tons and tons of families. We're seeing public hearing after public hearing that is related to the west side, whether it's industry or new developments.
Yep.
And right
both,
now,
major both.
And right now, the province is currently strategic plan for this expanding growth in St. John is to build weird little sidecar trailer things onto the schools that they literally just built. One of them being Seaside Park.
Yeah, it's already got 3 modules on it.
Yeah, 3 modular classrooms where they just were like, oh yeah, so they erased a lot of community schools over the past few decades.
Yep.
Again, centralization, main theme of New Brunswick politics for sure. And now, we're going to see probably another 10,000 people able to live on the west side over the next 5 years. Will it be new schools? Will it be, more modular classrooms? Like, how are they going to deal with this growth problem that they have here?
Yeah, and
because they're slow to build schools. It took 10 years
to get one.
In
St. John, and we were the last one to get it on the list. It is a bizarre process, but it goes to show that New Brunswick just doesn't have the firepower to solve its problems. We've been hauled out. We haven't collected the industry taxes because we said if we tax the industry, they're going to leave, and now will be nothing. And the reality is that's just not true. You can't prove it with anything. You can't prove that raising taxes on industry, that mature industries, causes them to pack up and leave. I haven't seen anything yet. Norway basically gave the middle finger to the oil industry and said, hey, if you want to come do business here, it's a 75% marginal tax rate. 75%. And guess what we have? Shell. Yeah. And it's a huge, massive corporation. It's funded that entire economy. And they've got this massive sovereign wealth fund. And it's like, of course it works. Yeah. I know we're not Norway, but the principle applies here. We will figure out how to run our economy. We don't need to continue to give taxpayer money and breaks, unequitable breaks to the industry partners. So we have no firepower. The province is that we got deficit spending now. Yeah. Deficit spending's back. We're now freezing property tax rates, assessments.
We have not even touched on that. We've grazed it, I think, once. So let's get into the property tax assessment freeze. We should have Jerry Iwanis here for this, actually.
Oh, well, we'll get into Jerry. Jerry will bring
Jerry's own commentary on all of it.
Yes, you can find Jerry's own commentary.
And we know he's going to listen to this probably in 1 hour because he's one of our, we love you, Jerry. Thank you for always
but we're going to have him back.
We're going to have him back because this one, he is adamant that municipalities need to get there in order. And I actually love him calling us out. I think it's great.
Yeah, I would love to set my tax rate to what I need. Yeah. It'd be $3 per 100. Yeah. Everybody's taxes would triple.
Especially in our, our infrastructure deficit city, right?
So if we wanted to actually run the city properly, I think we need a $300 million budget, not 190. Okay. That, just based on 5 years around or 4 years around the horseshoe. And seeing all the things that take 5 years to do, 1 year to do, that then causes more problems because of the delay, that then chokes up all staff hours trying to troubleshoot problems that are imposed on us by the province. You need a bunch of money that you don't have. Yeah. And you won't, and so it's we either have to raise industry and commercial rates, or we have to raise residential. And right now the province has said,
you're not allowed.
No, you're not allowed to touch industry. No. So if we wanted, Jerry's right, municipalities need to get in order. We need to get our infrastructure deficit underway. We need to pave the pathway for development in our cities, because especially our cities, because especially here in St. John and Moncton and other places, there's major expansion opportunities, cheap land, good trade networks, deep water ports, East Coast, which is closer to Europe, which is who our new trade partners are going to be.
Because this has been in the works for so long. I've said this before in here. Worked in economic development about 10 years ago at Enterprise St. John, which is now Envision. So back then there was just such a desperation around so much because we didn't have these critical pieces like the Deepwater Port, the land that the port currently has sitting down on it.
Yeah. The rail connection.
Yeah, we just kind of seemed like a lame duck when it came to the pieces of the puzzle that we needed at all.
Yeah.
So now it's like the problems we have are so different than they were 10 years ago. Like we were kind of sitting around like watching the tumbleweeds blow by. And now someone posted today on Facebook the lineup of ships that are currently out at the anchor point waiting to come in here.
Yeah,
there's like about 5 or 6 ships out there. Like there used to be, they'd always just be able to roll in and roll out. And there was no issue. There's actually a queue now. So we're seeing this stuff, and it's what we all as, voters really wanted, right? Like everyone's voted red or blue for as long as as long as we can go back in Canadian history.
That's right.
And not one of those parties has ever said, we want to, slow it down, limit industry. In fact, like I've said on here many times, Canada's multiple corporations and trench coat, because we have been very focused on business and growing our productivity and all of that kind of stuff. So St. John, though, has always felt like it's like, they're just missing the point somehow. And so now it really does seem like it's becoming more crystal clear especially with this whole One Canada stuff going around.
Yeah, it's true. And I agree. Like St. John has missed the boat in the past. And now, there is so much opportunity coming this way. It's going to be hard to manage.
Mm-hmm.
And we are going to need to build at the pace of change and the pace of business, which is 3 times ahead of where we're at. Again, like we just can't, like people need to realize, and people need to start talking about this. I think this is probably the most unspoken, okay, politics is taboo, okay, religion's taboo at the dinner table. I don't think so.
No.
Taboo at the dinner table is, are we going to live more simply, or are we going to continue to like expect the level of consumption that we can get? Because if we're going to expect the level of consumption, we're going to need GDP. And if we need GDP, we're going to need this type of expansion.
It's like you need to pick a lane, right?
You
like,
can't have your cake and eat it too.
No, because we're not interested in agriculture. We just talked about that. Everyone voted in this government, like super jazzed too. So you didn't want that. But you don't want like development or any kind of like places to change as well. There's just a lot of like ethical and moral and value-based conundrums, I think, that we're going through ourselves, and we see here in the community. Hi. Because unfortunately, what I think I learned out of like losing 2 times for the Greens is that you guys don't want that. You don't want to go down that road, like as a province, as a community. Like you want to go down the road of development. You want to go down the road of growth and like industrial, like championing and like charities being, given stuff from these big corporations in order to survive. Like y'all are okay with that. Like y'all are fine with it. And so I am ultimately not, but I am ultimately a servant of the people too. So I need to recognize the fact that that's not the lane anybody's currently in.
Yeah.
700 people are in it.
Yeah. It's it's crazy, because that is the most taboo conversation. How's the future going to look for our kids? And how do we want it to look? Because it isn't, if we don't develop places, and if we don't
build neighborhoods,
pay a price.
Yeah. We're going to have to build new neighborhoods.
Like we're going to have to pay, like, so that's why I say we're going to have to raise our taxes 3 times.
Mm-hmm.
And so right now, our tax rate in St. John is one of the highest in the country. It's not the highest.
Not anymore.
We're like 5th or something. But like, it's $1.62. Fredericton's like $1.38. Moncton's like $1.44 per 100 or something like that, right? I'm probably getting Fredericton and Moncton wrong. But we've lowered the tax rate every year we've come here because assessments have gone up. Now assessments are frozen, and that's a strategic housing thing to save people money, because their assessments are going to go up. It's like, okay, you've just taken more money out of the province's bank to be able to do that work. So now we're not going to do that work. Now we're not going to have the money needed to really put in the services, the structures, the ability to move the goods and distribute the goods, the whole piece. All of that is going to be missing because you don't have any money to pay for it. So now we're back cap in hand to the government, the federal government, to bail us out, because we won't pay the price. Here, people, I'm already taxed. My taxes don't do any work. We have only ever lowered taxes since we've got here Assessments go up, but they're not even close to the rest of the country. Our wages aren't growing. So who controls the majority of those wages in the private sector? It's Irving. Back to your industrial debacle here, right? Back into your conundrum. I know this looks like Charlie, but you've got a wage reality in New Brunswick, which is underperforming the rest of the country, which means people do feel the pinch of paying high taxes. That's money out of my wallet, of course. And whenever I talk to somebody about this, they just be like, well, the government mismanages their money. And I'm like, either this government inordinately mismanages their money, or there's something else to that equation. Because every government mismanages their money, but every other province, including Nova Scotia, Newfoundland, like country provinces and areas, do a better job on this front of preparing the ground, if you will, for some of these expansions and these changes. And all we're doing here is calling a frozen property tax assessment reality a housing policy, and it's not.
No.
And it's not going to change the game. It's going to, for any, I don't know, like, okay, so I owe $400 less in taxes this year.
But I mean, it certainly doesn't affect us. And I genuinely do not think that our landlord is going to be like, you know what, guys, $50 off a month this year.
Yeah.
We just froze it. Just froze it.
Oh my God.
We're going to lower your rent, actually, because we're paying the same. Yeah. You guys, I love it. No, of course not. So like, there's a house up the street from us, has 5 units. It's for sale for $700,000. And we're in a place that experiences significant amounts of crime. So like, so really, like, this to me is a delay tactic, because some of the other stuff that's going around about it is that, well, Service New Brunswick just needs a new system. And let me tell you, gang, here's some PCNB for like 4 years ago. That was the same sentence I heard from them when I was on the ad hoc committee for municipal reform, which we still get updates about, actually. But they really said, you know, gosh, like SNB, it's this monolithic old system. We're going to have to get in there. It's going to take a couple years, but yeah, we're committed. Turns out none of that ever happened.
None of it happened. None of it's ready. And it was happening in 21 when that conversation was going on, because we asked the ability for differential tax
Well, we're just like, why can't you guys do this? Why can't you say, like, a convenience store is different than a refinery? And they're like, well, the computer can't.
Oh, man, that's
too crazy.
Too far. And we're like, every other province does this. What's the problem? Oh, Service New Brunswick, you know, they're basically using fax machines and carbon paper copies to fill it out. So we're going to put some computers in there, and that's like, honestly,
that's kind of how it sounded.
Okay, I'm turning this into a Trailer Park Boys episode, but that's, I mean, to me, that's the easiest way to describe it, because that's what they were saying. It's a technological problem.
And actually, having been involved in tech companies that were much smaller, but even ones that were built here in New Brunswick that were looking at running medical filing systems for like massive US hospital networks of like hundreds of thousands of people. I'm like, so there's companies in like literally down the street from the legislature that are doing this, like in the US, like managing records essentially is what you're doing. But we can't figure out how to take less than 1 to 2 years to implement a system for how many homeowners are there?
Oh, in New Brunswick, I think, you know, it's like what, 280,000?
A 280,000 unit, like PID, let's say.
Those are homes. Those are homeowners.
So we look at all the PIDs in New Brunswick, let's say, even if it is one PID for every person.
No. Sorry, wait. Yeah. So the New Brunswick home ownership rate is higher than the rest of the province. It's around 55%, 800,000 people. You got to divide that up. But yeah, I think it's around what I said, 200 and something.
Okay. PIDs, places that would have an assessment attached to it.
Right.
So you can't convince me that Amazon can handle bajillions of products like they do.
Oh my God.
We can't manage 200 and some thousand, assessments that happen year over year.
Because they've got a bureaucrat who doesn't know anything about the topic. And then they're going to go hire a consultant who's only there to make their firm money. And even the best consultants in the world are still there to make money. So like, even if they're not in it to gouge people, even if they just want to do a good job being a consultant, telling our bureaucrat who doesn't know anything about the topic how or who they might reach out to, it's still going to be a limited scope. And so then you got to imagine that process that I just described. Just think a consultant to say, well, you know, we think the Alberta system would be best for you, and that's owned by this company that they use to,
they'll make a recommendation, and then they'll have to actually go and implement it as a service in New Brunswick. And that is ultimately up to them to manage it. And I don't know why they're okay with this 1 to 2 year.
No, it's pathetic,
timeline.
and it's already 2 years, or sorry, 4 years late. So it just goes to show, like, who needs to get their house in order? Jerry, you say us, and it's like, okay, well, I can get our house in order. I just have to triple people's tax rates, and I'll get voted out of office in May. No one will ever vote for me again, guaranteed. No one will care about the nuance of this conversation. No one will even be aware of it, even if I yell it on every street corner. No one will understand it, and the ones that do really won't want to make it their
They're still
fight.
paying more taxes.
They want to make it their fight. Nobody wants to pay more taxes. That's what it comes down to. We don't want to put in the work for the common good.
Yeah.
But yet we expect the common good to improve our quality of life. And there is no situation where improving quality of life doesn't lead to exceeding your margins, exceeding your boundaries, right? We have embraced a worldview in New Brunswick where we lose a little bit each year, but we call it okay. And we're not willing to do the hard work to exceed the margin, which would costly, right? Like, if you want to build your house in 2 months so that you can get that job done really fast, you got to put in a ton of work. This doesn't change. It doesn't mean if it's government or services or anything. It's the same type of scenario.
And we've been very clear, especially as a city, and I know there's other cities out there that believe this too, about what it is we want and what we want the ability to do.
Yeah. And
it's fallen on deaf ears as far as I can see and tell. Like, and I had such hope, back even when they won, thinking like, okay, well, we have like a former counselor there, we have like all these people who know the ins and outs of what we have been through to advocate for industrial tax reform specifically.
Just really that
we already been like, I know
that was the only ask by the end of it. Out of the sustaining St. John, a three-part plan, which was written in 2019 and brought down by Jeff Carr when he was the minister of whatever it was.
Local government.
Like that was written then. There's like 10 things the province needs to get sorted. And at a municipal level, all we were doing was formally asking for the industrial piece.
And this may be a conspiracy theory because I just think they're saying this thing about the technology because they don't want to do it.
Of course.
So it's not really that there's a tech problem, because I really do feel like with a couple of minutes with ChatGPT, I could probably figure out what the best system would be for them to implement this.
You can't tell me it's going to cost more than a few $1 million.
No, you cannot.
You can't. A few $1 million
for a record-keeping system.
For a record-keeping change. Like it, but they probably got a bureaucrat somewhere that's putting it at $15-20 million.
Sure.
Like a full systems change. We're going to have to change the furniture in every office, actually, to make place for these new computers. They're the only new computers that can run the system. Like that's probably the world that they've created, right, for themselves. And this is like
it's not just theory. This is a theory.
Yeah,
I've not actually heard that at all. I'm sure there are some very smart people that in there that would love to see something happen and would know exactly what needed to be done.
Well, then
they're probably not the boss.
Right, but they're ghosts on the subject too. Like there's nobody walking around in the public forum I can see anywhere, like even anonymously posting this on Reddit, being like, "The province is lying to you. They quote, my department runs this. I'm an insider at Service New Brunswick.
But no one.
We could do it for $50 on a subscription to this like new software that exists."
And maybe Jerry actually. I feel like it's funny that we're talking directly to you. But like, tell us more about that piece, because I think, and then now we have all these questions for him to come back to, because it's like, is this a legitimate thing that we're talking about here? Is this a really uphill battle? Are they telling the truth, or are we correct in our assumption that this is not actually a big deal to do, and they've just been using it as a can to kick down the way?
Yeah. Well, anyway, so that's where we're at, folks. Provincially, there's all these messes.
They're just kind of like cropping up, like little tent fires or something, like little hay bale fires.
Yeah, the government is spending more money, but not raising more money, and is faced with a more existential challenge.
Yes.
Now than we were when the pandemic was here, I think.
Yes.
I think because New Brunswick got off pretty easy on the pandemic. Like I'm not saying that people didn't suffer and there weren't deaths, of course there were, but like we were open to internal movement
Yeah.
more than any other province,
Yeah.
I think.
Like it's like, well, you just
PEI
didn't have
but I think even PEI was worse than us for a few
shutdown stuff.
yeah.
You mean? Yeah.
Yeah, like having things shut down completely.
Well, as having bought a restaurant during a pandemic and having it failed also during a pandemic, I know that there was a lot of sort of intrinsic hope in 2021 when I did purchase that place, that this was going to turn around and this was going to be great. But like literally, I don't think the uptown of St. John has recovered. City Market certainly hasn't recovered. We've seen more
people are around,
closures
but
there.
they're more poor.
Yes, there are still people, but we don't have spending power, and like we know that very well. There's just not a lot to go around. So when you kind of go out to like a restaurant or something, you're like, okay, well, this is it for the week.
Yeah,
like,
you're getting a special. And
yeah,
then, calling it quits for a month.
Yeah. You just don't. People don't have daily lunch money, I guess, was our biggest problem.
Yeah. Yeah, and so I don't know, where do we go from here provincially, guys? I don't know. Somebody must be out there and be hopeful. I mean, Sean Rouse, you're out there and you're pretty hopeful usually. So explain to us who in government looks like they've got a sense of this. Luke is the Minister of Small Business and OMB and stuff like that. Massive file right now. Not hearing anything or seeing much on that front from the government or from Luke specifically. Like even if Luke knew as much as I did about this, and I'm not an economist and I'm not a trade expert or a lawyer or any of this, but from paying attention, I know a little bit. And even if he knew as much as I do, I think he would see this tremendous opportunity that's coming and really want to create a team and put that team out and be the center of attention. So I'm not convinced that Luke knows that much.
I mean, both from the perspective of the interprovincial trade piece and from the One Canada economic development strategy. Because I read Prime Minister Carney's mandate letter.
Yes.
Which is really good. I actually appreciated that because it's like, it really lines out everything he's trying to do.
7 things. He didn't give individual mandate letters.
No.
One generic one, which I think that was smart.
I feel like he's just this epic boss leader type dude, and wherever he worked, I'm sure that everyone feels like this is how it's supposed to go. Man of the moment, man of the time. So but he is committing to all these things. And is New Brunswick gonna be the one who says no thank you, like we'll stay the way we are, or are we gonna participate and be like all in on it?
Susan is doing, I'll give her props for this, she is getting recognized at the federal level for her involvement with the interprovincial trade talk and premier talk. So Wab Canoe mentions her from time to time. Doug Ford mentions her from time to time. They often mention in their chats, they mention each other. So so Doug Ford will mention Wab Canoe, Tim Houston, and Susan Holt. Yeah, okay. And Wab will do the same way the other way. So you can literally see a Manitoba, Ontario, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick sort of collection. And Quebec just seems to be a little bit like tepid, but they're around for the chat. Well, they're always going to have their own issues. Like they barely, hung on through their cultural. But Saskatchewan and Alberta ready to leave. Yeah. I don't even know what's going on with BC. I haven't heard much from EB. He was quite prolific there for a little bit around those premier chats, but I haven't heard from him recently. California of Canada. What do you mean? Yeah. So she's getting some recognition. She's being seen as somebody who's trying to move the needle. So that's good. Good for her. But I don't know, what does it mean for the government's position on this? How is New Brunswick positioned to trade with Europe, to move stuff from Central Canada, Western Canada to our new European markets, which we're required to find if it's not going to be 90% US. The only other market that has a purchasing power, the population to consume what we move and make is Europe. Yeah. And we're going to have to change a lot about what we make and move and grow because Europe doesn't want what the US wanted. No, I don't think so. So the auto industry is a perfect example. Yeah. We're getting killed by the Americans on auto tariffs. We got thousands of auto workers out of business. Those auto workers are machinists, they're technologists. They are not your grandfather's factory floor workers. Like these are advanced manufacturing facilities that would be 3 times the size of the old style factories from the 60s and 70s on assembly lines. But technical. But they'll only employ like a third of who used to work there because of automation and machinery and different things. So they're out of work, but they're perfectly qualified to do a range of other stuff that we need done in the advanced manufacturing area, like refinement of critical minerals, like distribution, like extraction, it's not the same as building a car, but if you have expertise at reading a machine and understanding how machine,
what does that transition look like, and what are we looking to do? I don't know how far along some of that stuff is.
I know, but the auto sector's not come back in Canada.
No.
And so Ontario seems to know that too.
Yeah.
Like Doug Ford, they're doubling down, they are just doing their best. But there hasn't been a bailout package announced for the auto sector like there was in 2008. And I get it was different reasons, but there's no bailout even being talked about. And it's not, usually it's like, well, if we lose another factory, if we lose Oshawa, the other one, then that's the tipping point instead of Windsor. But we're not there. So do they know instinctively that they can't save the auto sector? Because the auto sector in Canada is never going to compete with the auto sector in Europe.
No. And plus, we were hearing too that there's a lot of electric vehicles that are coming directly from China into the European market, right?
12 grand for a car.
Oh yeah. So we're never going to compete with China on cars if that becomes what they get into.
And that comes down to tariffs.
Yes.
Right. If there's 140% tariffs on the $13,000 car, well, now it's $70,000, and now it's,
Yeah.
So it's or whatever. Math's a little off there, but I just look at this and it's like Ontario seems to understand. Doug is talking to Susan.
Yeah.
Susan is getting recognized, but our provincial government doesn't seem to understand, or they're just not telling us.
Or they're not telling us, and this is all behind closed doors right now, which could be very possible too. Because
the industrial park expansion here in St. John is probably between that and
Moncton.
No, between that project, in Spruce Lake, in the Lorneville area, and the one that's already undergoing with NextGen, we've got potentially 3 mega projects. Mega projects are just qualified as anything where it's $1 billion or more in expenditures to create something. Tissue, Irving JDI Tissue is putting $1 billion in. There's 2 letters of interest on the Spruce Lake Industrial Park expansion here in St. John that are worth $1 billion each. So that's 3 major projects. It certainly looks like the floor is being aligned to do some of this, but the province is barely weighed in on the matter of Spruce Lake.
I mean, I fear speaking too much about this one since it's ongoing. But,
again, I'm not relating it to our decision or anything.
No. It just is something that is being looked at, right? And I think that it's one of these things where is it of national interest? Is it of provincial interest? I'm not sure. I can't tell.
No.
I feel like we're a bit on an island here, trying to balance the residents' concerns and also the opportunity. It's an incredibly difficult decision. And you've talked about it on a blog post, and we've had to be careful, but ultimately I think it warrants the broader conversation about what it is we're after.
Well, we're going to do, I think you heard it here first. We're going to do a podcast just on the Lorneville experience after we get there, because whatever the outcome is, it's a pretty interesting reality
story. And this is the stuff we're super interested in. If this was happening in Moncton, I'd be so
all over
interested in because it is a multi-layered conversation, because we've talked about it today about what is the direction. What have we agreed upon as a direction?
Yes, and this is why this is really where I wanted to go with that conversation about the interprovincial stuff. Is and about their policies. It's like, if the province knows that, for example, Central Canada's positioning itself around EV production, but they're doing so specifically, Upper Canada, I should have said, as a good St. John, Upper Canada up there in Ontario, they are positioning themselves with companies like Stellantis, although that got put on hold, for a component manufacturing of EVs, right? So Timmins, Ontario is around the Ring of Fire. Huge amounts of mineral opportunity in a range of minerals, copper.
I was in a gold mine in Timmins once.
Gold, copper are big ones. Nickel, obviously up there around Sudbury, but that's mostly dried up. But there's all kind. I don't even know what they all are. I think there's cobalt. I think there's a couple of it. But they have huge opportunity. But that's raw mineral, right?
That's going to be
and
big.
so if they do get a Stellantis plant to be able to component manufacture batteries or systems of EVs, you're going to have to take that raw mineral and refine it somewhere in Canada. It would make some sense to do it in New Brunswick because we have a major refinery. I mean, refinement process for minerals is very different than oil, but there's still a refinement process, and it's still similar backgrounds and specializations and trainings that you would need to do to understand the machinery and the process and all the stuff. So you could make a case for that. Ontario has some refining capacity too. So it's hard to say. It's like you can see the triangulation there on the East Coast, but I don't see anything from the provincial government that would be saying, look at this opportunity. Because if
we want to get into these 5 things.
If I'm the minister, I'm like, here's where we're going. This is our most strategic opportunity in 100 years. Like, boom, boom, boom. Here's what you see happening around the province that is pointing at this.
Where's all the world-class talk that we're so used to?
Oh, man. Yeah. Anyway, we don't see it. It's confusing.
It is confusing, and it feels isolating in some ways, because there is a lot of big talk about the fact that they're having these meetings, like these premiers are getting together. They're all like aligned with Carney. There was just an election. We heard a lot of big conjecture there. So now it's like, okay, what are we doing? So yeah. Anyway, so we have about 5 minutes.
No, we got to wrap it up. Beatrix getting frustrated with us.
She is.
She already ate a banana. Dad.
Say hi to everybody. Can you wave? Can you wave? Hey, say hi.
Can you say dad? Oh, she got the mic. All right, guys. Sorry for the mic craziness. We're going to see if she would talk to you, but coming soon to a podcast near you, Beatrix will be live. Next time we see you guys will be next week. We'll be recording while we're in Ottawa. Yay. So at the FCM, it's going to be all things municipalities.
Yes.
We're going to tell you all about how the people from Alberta looked at us like we had 10 heads because we let our industry get away with murder. And we'll have more stories, I'm sure.
More stories.
Hopefully we get to see the King. Maybe we'll get a glimpse of the King.
The King's supposed to be there the day before. I really want to meet Mark Carney. That's my goal, is to meet the Prime Minister. I met Kim Campbell when I was about 10 years old or whatever.
10 minutes Prime Minister.
10-minute Prime Minister. That's the only Prime Minister I've ever met. So, and she was at the City Market coming through because she was campaigning. And yeah, I've always been into this stuff. It's like, we got to go see her. I was so excited.
Mutants.
Genuinely wanted to go see Kim Campbell. Anyway.
We are mutants for politics. Okay, guys. Thanks for another week. We'll see you in 7 days.
Connect with us by visiting our website or email us at comments@rogerstv.com.
I'm a singer-songwriter from Six Nations, and I've been writing songs about my experience, and with that being said, it's helped me hold hope in my heart in following my dreams and being resilient to everyday Indigenous battles. Competition between spirit, earth, and wind, let me tell you now. This song in particular, The Shiner, is a special song that I wrote for my grandfather. He was a snow snake maker, and that is a Haudenosaunee winter sport. It's my job to educate and to share, and the music allows me to do that. He'll be shining snow snakes and mud